Copper Sun, Part 6, Chapters 27 and 28. Chapter 27. Amari was waiting for Polly in the kitchen. "Is the baby safe?" Polly asked her. Amari nodded and then asked, "What Massa say?" Polly looked at her and said, "It's very bad. Mr. Derby wants the doctor to see the body of the child." "What we do?" Amari asked, turning to ask Teeny for advice. "We must stop the wagon with Noah and the doctor before it gets here," Polly declared. "Ain't no we 'bout it," Teeny replied as she shucked the basket of corn. "You a white gal. You the only one that be allowed on the road after dark." Polly took a deep breath. "All right, I'll go. Tell me what to do." "Whatever it takes to turn that wagon around," Teeny said without conviction. "Ain't gonna be easy." Dusk had fallen. Polly left the kitchen and headed down to the main road, the road that had brought her to this place with Amari. So much has changed since then, she thought. She half walked, half jogged about a mile, the darkness so thick that it seemed to smother her, when she heard the wagon approaching. As it got close to her, she ran toward it, startling the horses. "Please, sir," Polly began, "are you Dr. Hoskins?" She did not look at Noah, although she had a feeling he knew what was going on. "Yes, I am. Is Mrs. Derby all right?" "Oh, yes, sir. She's just fine. And the baby, too. Crying and nursing and being sweet like newborns always are, sir." Polly knew she was babbling, but she couldn't find the words to make him turn around. "That's why I came out to meet you, sir, to tell you that the baby has been born with no complications. Mrs. Derby is fit and fine, and your services are no longer needed. Mr. Derby wanted to save you an unnecessary house call." She spoke very quickly, glad that it was dark and that they couldn't see how scared she was. Noah seemed to understand immediately that it was not a good idea for the doctor to make it to the plantation, for he spoke up to say, "I'll be glad to drive you back to Charlestown, sir. No trouble at all, sir." "Nonsense," the doctor replied gruffly. "No, you will not drive me back. It took us 4 hours to get here. I shall see to my patient and her infant. I shall eat a fine meal prepared by the Derby servants, and I shall spend the night here and return refreshed to Charlestown in the morning. We shall proceed to Derbyshire Farms." "But, sir," Polly tried weakly. "Who are you, my dear, and why are you out here on the road after dark?" He offered Polly his hand and helped her up onto the wagon. "It is not safe, you know. Highwaymen will slice your throat in a heartbeat." Defeated, Polly replied, "My name is Polly Pritchard. I work for Mr. Derby." "Did he send you out here to send me back?" Dr. Hoskins asked. Polly wasn't sure whether to lie or tell the truth, so she said nothing in reply. The wagon moved slowly toward the house. Polly prayed, silently fingering the tie strings on her bonnet. Mr. Derby waited near the big circular pillars at the front of the house. He looked grief-stricken. "Thank you for making this long drive, Hoskins," he said to the doctor as he stiffly stepped down from the wagon. "But I'm afraid your trip was in vain. Isabel is fine." But the baby was stillborn. He choked on the words. Dr. Hoskins looked confused. "Stillborn? This young woman here told me the baby was fine and healthy. What's going on?" Polly tried to jump down from the wagon, but Mr. Derby grabbed her arm, the anguish on his face turning to anger. "What is going on here? I told you I would never allow any insubordination in my household. You explain what is going on this instant." Polly's heart pounded. She opened her mouth to speak just as she heard Lena's voice behind her, yelling from an upstairs window, "Oh, massa, come quick! Miss Isabel done fainted." Mr. Derby released Polly and ran with the doctor into the house. Polly collapsed on the ground with relief. This night is not going to end well, she thought fearfully. Amari ran out of the kitchen as soon as the two men had disappeared. She looked directly at Noah, who was staring toward Mrs. Derby's window with concern. "Baby is black," Amari told him bluntly. "Pretty girl, child." Noah groaned and covered his head with his hands. "Is Isabel all right? The baby is alive?" Polly was surprised by the seeming depth of his anguish. Teeny had come out of the kitchen to join them. She wiped her hands on her apron. "Yeah, they both alive for now, but it won't take long for Massa to figure out what really happened." We's all in big trouble trying to cover up your mess. Tidbit ran from the kitchen and toward his mother. She yelled at the child fiercely. You go get in the kindling box and hide there, you hear? Don't you come out till I come get you. The boy took a long look at her face and hightailed it back to the kitchen. Noah sat on the ground in the dirt. It seemed to Polly he was overwhelmed by the evening's events. We growed up as children together, he explained. She was the mistress, of course, and I be the slave, but that didn't make us no matter at all. We go fishing and running through the woods, just liking each other, you know. Teeny grunted and kept glancing at the window to the upstairs room where Lena and Miss Isabel were trying to stall the doctor and Mr. Derby. What was you thinking? Teeny asked finally, annoyance and amazement in her voice. Just 'cause a chicken got wings don't mean it ought to fly. Y'all should have known better. And she got older, Noah continued, ignoring Teeny. She turned down every good-looking boy who come to court her. Her daddy finally put a stop to that young girl foolishness and married her off to Massa Derby. She cried for days before the wedding. Noah stopped. His shoulders drooped. When Massa Derby moved her here, she insists I come with her. Her daddy didn't see no harm, so she and me was real happy. When she found out she was with child, we figured the baby belonged to Massa Derby. At least that's what we was hoping. Mistress and slave, falling in love? Polly realized with a start. I didn't think such a thing was even possible. Has something like this ever happened before? Polly asked. Noah shook his head. I don't know, Missy. No one's done lived to tell about it. You gotta run away, Noah, Teeny told him clearly. Massa gonna kill you for sure. I ain't running. I love her, he replied simply. Teeny snorted. Love don't mean pig spit round here. She had no more time to argue with him, for at that moment Mr. Derby emerged from the front door of the house, angrily holding up a weak and sobbing Mrs. Derby. In his right hand he held a gun. The doctor, noticeably, had remained inside. Polly, Teeny, and Amari drew back at the fury on Mr. Derby's face. Noah stood slowly and with dignity. He looked at Isabel Derby with the look of absolute love on his face. She seemed to relax as she gazed at Noah. She smiled at him, then reached out to him with her free hand. Her husband slapped her arm down. Isabel, he barked, his voice tight with fury. Coming from the opposite direction, from the slave quarters, the sharp wailing cry of a newborn could be heard. As they all turned in that direction, they could see Clay Derby strolling toward them, carrying the baby girl. The infant had been stripped of her blanket, and she protested loudly in the chill night air. Polly was having difficulty finding each new breath. She had to force herself not to reach out and grab the baby from Clay. Looking for something, Father? He asked with a grin. I found this baby down at Sarah Jane's place. She swears it's her baby, but it looks to be newborn, and her little pinkanini must be about 3 months old. Seems a bit impossible, don't you think? Polly could tell that Clay was actually enjoying this. She and Amari watched, horrified, as Clay laid the naked screaming baby on the dirt in front of his father. Polly grabbed Amari's hand and squeezed it. She wanted to run to the child and pick her up, but she dared not move. A look of revulsion crossed Mr. Derby's face as he stared at the perfect brown features of the infant. Isabel Derby cried out, My baby! And reached for the child on the ground in front of her, but her husband held her firmly. Noah, impassive once more, showed no outward emotion, but tears slipped down his face. Mr. Derby, his voice full of self-control, spoke calmly and clearly to his wife. I loved you, he said, almost plaintively. You were so young and beautiful, like springtime all year long. I just knew you would erase all the sorrows from my past. Mrs. Derby shuddered. Her head hung low. But you chose to betray me, her husband said, venom returning to his voice. You are not even worthy of my vomit, he inhaled. But I shall not kill you, he continued in a low, eerily controlled voice. She looked at him in surprise. Instead, I shall refuse to let you die. Polly was confused. She did not understand what he meant. But soon it became terribly apparent. Mr. Derby pulled his wife over to where Noah stood. Then with one hand, he cocked the musket and aimed it at Noah's broad chest. He spat at Noah, then glanced at his wife. He made sure she was watching. Then he fired. Noah's blood splattered them all as he fell to the ground not far from his child. Polly screamed, Amari cried out, and Teeny fell to her knees mumbling, "Oh, sweet Jesus." The noise of the gunshot startled the baby, who cried even louder from where she lay on the ground. Mrs. Derby, shrieking and twisting like a madwoman, fought to get free of her husband's grip. Mr. Derby suddenly released her in a heap on the ground as he calmly, swiftly reloaded the gun. Sobbing hysterically, Isabel Derby scrambled in the dirt toward her baby. She had almost reached the infant when another gunshot exploded in the darkness. The baby was suddenly silent.